Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Adam Green here with No More News Live. Thank you all for joining me. Today is Thursday, May 20th, 2021, and today I have a very distinguished guest joining me to discuss an extremely controversial topic and his latest book, Jesus Hoax. We're going to be discussing very concise, well put together. I've done a lot of research on early Christianity, and a lot of the most important stuff made it into this book. A very thought-provoking concept, the Jesus hoax, how St. Paul's cabal fooled the world for 2,000 years. Joining me is the author, David Skrbina, PhD in philosophy, long-time philosophy university professor. Thank you, David, for joining us. I'm honored to have you here. I loved your book. Thanks for being here. Tell us about it.
Yeah, hi, Adam. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. Yeah, so, I mean, it's like you say, interesting book, I think, controversial thesis. I mean, the idea, I guess I'd like to claim more credit than I probably can. It's not really my invention. It's really a very old idea, this idea that Christianity was a kind of deception or a hoax. Goes back decades, you know. I mean, the roots of it maybe were in the sort of the mid-1800s. Nietzsche had a lot of the key elements in the late 1800s, especially in his short book Antichrist. Even some Jewish writers in the early 20th century had the essence of the story as well. So the bits and pieces have been around for a long time. I think what's kind of compelling recently is that we have better data. We have better archaeological data and scientific data about history, and we can really do a better job than any time in the past about really piecing together the story as factual and as accurate as possible. And these ancient writers, they just were in no position to do this. They just kind of had to make presumptions and guesses about what was going on. But yeah, I mean, the Jesus hoax thesis is really very concise. I mean, I can put it in just a few lines if I can give you the short version.
Please.
Yeah, so, I mean, the basic story, of course, everybody knows, you know, Jesus is the miracle man in the Bible. So he's walking on water, he's raising the dead, he's healing the sick, he's calming the storm, and so forth. I guess the first point is that if Jesus really was this miracle man, there would be contemporaneous evidence. So we had lots of witnesses, hundreds or thousands of witnesses to these miracles. And we had the Romans who were in charge of Palestine at the time. And we had the Jews and the pagans, the native Arab people who were there. We had Jewish scholars who were aware of what was going on. There would have been evidence. If Jesus was a miracle man, there would have been somebody documenting the evidence. The second point is we have no evidence at all. There's no such evidence. I mean, nothing at all from Jesus' lifetime, which we can nominally say from the year 0 to about the year 30. We'll just, for purposes, we'll call it the year of the crucifixion, the year 30. So we have no evidence during Jesus' lifetime. We have no evidence during the 3 years of his supposed teaching. We have no evidence for decades afterward. We have no, let's say, unbiased evidence for like 6 or 7 decades. I mean, it's really astonishing. The obvious conclusion then is that there really was no miracle man at all, right? So this is sort of the first piece of the puzzle well, there's two possibilities. Either there was no Jesus at all, and he was a pure fiction, or he was, as is described, a Jewish rabbi, a mortal man who agitated on behalf of his people, probably got in trouble with the Roman authorities, probably got crucified, which was the standard punishment by the Romans at the time, and then died and was buried somewhere, and we'll never know where it is. So the evidence is, since we don't have the miracle man evidence, the conclusion is there was no miracle man. Then along comes a group of people. Some years later, Paul is the first guy. He starts writing some letters in the 50s and the 60s AD, decades after the crucifixion, and he's telling the story about the miracle man who died, who's the Son of God, who went to heaven, is redeeming your sins, is going to bring you eternal life. So it seems like he's telling something which is clearly untrue. We have no evidence that the miracle man existed as a miracle man. Paul tells us there was a miracle man. So the presumption is, yeah, Paul lied. He was a liar. He made up this story. The gospel writers come after Paul dies. The 4 gospel writers, we'll just call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John for sake of convenience. So they're writing between the years 70 and, say, mid-90s. Again, even decades later than Paul. And they're giving us lots of stories about the miracle man. They're details of the miracles and the raising from the dead and the healing of the sick and all these very detailed miracle stories. Again, they're constructing these stories. There's no evidence they ever happened. Almost certainly they did not happen. They're being portrayed as truth. So, well, what's the obvious conclusion? These guys are liars. They constructed a story that was not true. They passed it off as truth. So, yeah. Let's just call them what they are. They're liars. I mean, they created a story and they lied. I guess the thing
for a reason.
Exactly. So this is the last little piece of the puzzle, right? So why would they do this? They didn't just do it for the fun of it, just because they were being malicious. I mean, they had a reason, and it really ties back to the conflict with Rome. And we know that the Romans moved into Palestine in 63 BC. They overthrew the Jewish tribes who were in charge, created enemies, hatred on the part of the Jews, who never liked foreign rulers for centuries before then, surely hated the Romans, hated the Roman rule, and you know, we're looking at ways of getting back at them. Obviously, military conflict was out of the question. They were completely overwhelmed by the Roman Empire. So, well, what's the obvious alternative? You take kind of a moral or a spiritual attack against the Roman worldview, the Roman ideology, and the Roman religion, the pantheism of Rome, if you will, and you create a counter story, something that's like Judaism with a Jewish God and a Jewish preacher who's the Son of God who came here to save you, and you portray this fellow, and he's here to rescue humanity from Satan, the evil power, which of course is Rome, and just believe in Jesus, believe in the Jehovah, the Jewish God, believe in the Jewish rabbi, and you will be saved from Rome. So that's the hoax story in a nutshell.
On page 100, you say, manipulate the Gentile masses for the benefits of a certain group. And when we see what's going on today, what do you see as the relationship between Christianity and Judaism in modern days? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, so there were conflicts that developed out of this hoax story, right? You know, Paul is working with a small cabal. It's a group of people, a group of Jews, they were all Jews, who are constructing this savior, this Messiah story, which ran counter to Judaism, traditional Judaism, which says there was no Messiah yet, no savior had come yet. So you're immediately creating a conflict within Judaism. You've got the small Christianized Jews who have a story that the Orthodox Jews don't like, because it goes completely counter to their religious outlook. You know, maybe they could see some benefit in the strategy. We don't really know, but there seems to be some conflict as far as we can tell. So that sort of sets the stage between the conflict between the standard Orthodox Jews and these new Christian Jews, and you can see it even in the stories that show up in the Gospels, right? So the Jews condemn Jesus, maybe the Jews put him to death, or they contributed putting to death, and they don't believe in him. So built into the story at the beginning is a conflict between traditional Judaism and this new religion that was invented by Paul and his followers. Immediately there's a conflict. And then, of course, this only grows with time as the Christian movement becomes almost entirely a Gentile movement, because the early Jews, they sort of fall away. It becomes a Gentile religion within a century or so. And so you have the theological conflict between the Gentile religion and the Jewish religion. You have the ethnic conflict between Gentiles as an ethnicity in general and the Jewish ethnicity. And there's a long-standing conflict there as well that goes back centuries and centuries. So you have a couple of levels of conflict between Gentile Christians and Jewish Jews, right? And then this goes back to the very beginning, and it's been true through the centuries. You saw it in early Christian movement, the early Christian fathers. You saw it in Aquinas. You saw it obviously in Martin Luther, who was a great opponent of the Jews. You see it in the persecutions through the centuries and standard Catholicism, and even up through much of the present day. There's been some funny things going on in recent years where they're trying to reconcile things, but basically it's a 2,000-year story of conflict on both ethnic and theological grounds.
So on page 74, you say, you quote Seneca saying, "The vanquished have given their laws to the victors." If you have a chapter on here about early pagan writers that were criticizing Judaism and Christianity. Can you tell us a little bit about that and kind of you set the context in the background story, what was going on then, and how Christianity actually was a preferred opposition than the pagans? Can you speak on that?
Right, so that's the chapter 4 in the book, right, where I'm detailing the long history of sort of anti-Jewish attitudes, right, that existed even before the Christian times. I mean, this goes back to 300 BC is probably the first critiques of the Jews, and you get it from the Greek thinkers like Theophrastus and Hecatæus of Abdera. They're critical of the Jewish people. As soon as they come in conflict, they have a problem. The things they don't like. These people are crazy. They're superstitious. They're malevolent. They hate the rest of humanity. I mean, you see these themes over centuries, completely prior to Christianity, prior to Roman invasion, all this stuff. It's a multi-century history of conflict. Anytime the Westerners, the Europeans, say, came into conflict or interacted with the Jewish people, you get this negative perception. And so to me, this was really important because it really set the stage and says, well, look, there's this long history of conflict. The Jews have been for centuries been proclaimed as exclusivist, as a kind of a superiority complex, as misanthropic, as hating the rest of humanity. You see this over and over again in these ancient sources. And so they really had this, they really detested anybody else, anybody who wasn't them. They really view them, of course, this is in the Bible, right? They're the chosen people. I mean, so God picks the Jews, everybody else is second choice at best, right?
Yeah, unchosen, unholy.
Unchosen. Yeah, exactly, right. So, I mean, to me, this sets the context when you have the Romans marching in, and of course, the Jews are already predisposed to hate the foreigners, hate the Gentiles. That's been documented for years. So here comes the Romans, which they already hate. Now the Romans throw them out of power. They get really mad at the Romans. They're really burning. They really want to get back at them. They're just figuring out what are the best ways to do it. There was a zealot movement. You're familiar with this one, kind of a militant, like a guerrilla war against the Romans, and they were doing periodic stabbings and killings of Romans and so forth when they could. But that was a very small potatoes kind of thing, right? It was really these bigger spiritual and worldview conflicts that was really kind of the genius of Paul and his followers, that constructed really an anti-Roman worldview to sort of draw the masses in and to really erode the foundation of support for Rome. That's really how I'm portraying it in the book.
So the Jews could never beat the Roman Empire and all the other empires with an army. They needed to come up with a subversive propaganda deception. And then in 300 years, it conquered Rome, and then it spread all across the world. And then now today, basically, they're using the Christian Zionists in America to, fulfill their Zionist objectives and continue on. Christians believe that in order for Jesus to return, they have to help the Jews. They have to have an antichrist, and they have to have a temple, and they need to restore the Jews to Israel. So they're helping the Jews along with their agenda with the promise that Jesus is going to come. I mean, it seems like quite the deception to me.
Yeah, again, but this is natural because it's built into the nature of the hoax, right? So Paul and the Jewish gospel writers, they're writing this story for the benefit of the Jews. Even though there's internal conflicts about how best to go about it, they're really worried about what's best for the Jews, what's best for Israel, what's going to bring us back to power. And so the whole story this is the underlying motive for everything. And then it's not surprising to see it in the passages in the Gospels and in what Jesus supposedly says, and the little bits of theology that we need to. The Jews are the good guys. We're the chosen ones. We need to help the Jews because that's gonna be lead to salvation in the end. So of course Christians who don't really understand the hoax aspect, they pick up these pro-Jewish threads which are actually there. And now this becomes, for the Christian Zionists, this becomes the be-all and end-all. We have to help the Jews. We have to rebuild the temple. That's really buying into the hoax completely. I mean, that's really was the intent, right? You guys are supposed to buy into the story because it's beneficial for the Jews.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Louis Ginsburg, but he's a very well-respected top historian on Judaism. In his book, Legends of the Jews, this is quoted from Safari. It's like the top Jewish online database. It says, they talk about Esau and Jacob both coming from the womb. Esau is Edom, is Rome. They say first Esau will subjugate the whole world, but in the end, Jacob or the Jews will rule over all. The older of the two shall serve the younger. So, talk about subjugating the world. I also wanted to show you Maimonides. Maimonides is one of the top rabbis in Judaism. He says here that he views Christianity and Islam as necessary preparations for the coming of the Messiah and the universal worship of God that will follow it. He says, quote from Maimonides, "The world has become full of ideas of the Messiah, the ideas of the Torah, and the ideas of the commandments, so that these have spread to faraway islands and to many dim-hearted nations, and now they discuss these ideas and the commandments, and spreading the notion of salvation coming from the Jews and they're chosen and worshiping the Jewish God." Obviously, this is a better situation than having Jews versus the pagan world like it was 2,000 years ago. It seems like a victory, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's how I've portrayed it, right? In the book, in the Jesus Hoax book, it was really, Paul and his cabal, they could not convert the masses to Judaism. I don't think they even wanted to do that, but they needed something that was Jewish-like, some kind of Jewish-oriented worldview or theological worldview that was going to buy them into the essence of the Jewish worldview. So, I mean, the obvious thing was to take the one Jewish God, Jehovah, and get them away from the polytheistic Roman system, right, and to buy them into the idea of a savior, of a Messiah, which was, of course, an essence of the Jewish religion. They put the little twist that he already came. Well, okay, well that's fine, and that gives a face and a name, so that the Gentiles can bind to an actual person instead of a concept that has yet to come. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that Christianity and Islam are basically offshoots of the Jewish theological structure, right? It's the one Jewish God and its basic Jewish precepts that are built into both those religions. So, in the sense that those are spreading, that's absolutely a victory for them.
I've had this author on as well, Laurent Guyenet from France. He has a book. You'll like this title. Our God is your God too, but He has chosen us. He has a whole chapter about the same thing, calling Christianity a Trojan horse into the West that was used to subvert and deceive. Gone over that before in a past video. I'll have him back on again. Here, let's see. You mentioned earlier that there's no proof. And by the way, we're going to be taking questions, and I'll let you know when I start paying attention. But towards the end of the stream, save your good questions. I don't want to hear any complaining in the comments. I want to see good questions to something we're talking about that we could hopefully answer for you. You said that there's no evidence. They say, what about Josephus? What about Tacitus? What's wrong with Josephus? Because that's what they love to hold on to Josephus, don't they? What are some of the problems with it?
Yeah, well, sure. So Josephus was basically a Jewish traitor, right? So he was captured by Rome, co-opted by the Romans, serves the Flavian dynasty. I mean, right. So he's writing, he's writing a couple of works that are quite well known. But I mean, even what his first work, The Jewish Wars, does not mention Jesus at all. There's really no mention in his first work. It's the second work. It's the Antiquities of the Jews, which comes out, I think, in 93 AD is the traditional dating for that. And there's a very short, just passing mention of Jesus, as the Christ and the Savior. Very short, kind of encapsulated thing. May well be an interpolation which was added later. Or there's a lot of debate about how authentic the wording of that one little passage is. But I mean, it's so late. I mean, even if it's completely authentic, I mean, this is what I've tried to argue in my book, right? That even if Josephus was correct and accurate, it was a very minor thing. It warranted a few sentences or one small paragraph in the year 93. It just says, okay, there's some Christians and they believe this guy and they think he's the Savior. So I mean, I have no problem with it. I mean, that was probably was valid. There was a growing movement at the time who did in fact believe that. And so it's not amazing that somebody like Josephus would be perceptive of that and throw a few words in a book about that. So I have no problem with that. It's just that it's very late. I mean, this is the earliest single mention of the Christians from a non-Christian source, right, outside of the New Testament is from Josephus. Yeah. That's why it's important. But it doesn't invalidate the thesis. It's completely compatible with the Hoax thesis that there was a small and growing Christian movement at the time.
There's a very popular another author and documentary, Caesar's Messiah, where he says his to summarize his theory, basically it was the Romans and some other collaborators that created Christianity, and it all represents Caesar, and that but he doesn't seem to say go where, take it where you take it, basically, nor do any of these other authors talking about early Christianity.
Yeah, so Caesar's Messiah, that's the Atwill book. Mm-hmm. And he's arguing that basically Paul was a kind of a pro-Roman agent, right, working on behalf of Rome or the Flavian emperors. And I mean, this just really has, I mean, it makes no sense. It has no evidence. And in fact, there's counter evidence to a very large degree. I mean, the only sort of vague evidence is they'll mention a few little pro-Roman passages that you find. There's a couple in Paul. There's a couple in the Gospels, render to Caesar and pay your taxes and, turn the other cheek and so forth. There's like literally a handful. I mean, you can count them on one hand, I think, these pro-Roman passages. And by contrast, and what I've documented in my book is when you look at the anti-Roman passages, both in Paul and in the Gospels, they're outnumbered 10 or 20 to 1. I think I've documented at least 50 very explicit anti-Roman, anti-ruling power passages. About half of them are in the Paul letters, about half of them are in the Gospels. So you see really kind of this revolutionary anti-Rome, anti-Satan, or defeat the ruling powers. You really see this message come out strongly in both Paul and the Gospels, and that's simply not something that you would see if Paul, in fact, was a Roman agent of some kind. So yeah, the Atwill thesis really doesn't hold up.
It seems like a lot of Christians don't realize that Paul actually never knew Jesus. The first writings about the Lord's Supper or the Last Supper are from Paul, and Paul was before the Gospels, and he never attended the Lord's Supper. You're trying to tell me that there was no other writing, none of the other apostles, nobody else wrote about any of these miracles until Paul came, and then Paul never even met him? Can you talk about that? His epiphany, like a light?
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, it's just insane, right? I mean, if there really were the 12 apostles that were the close followers, intimate followers of Jesus, they were living with him, they're following him around, listening to every word. I mean,
and it really sorry to interrupt, but it really just probably represents the 12 tribes of Israel and the zodiac.
Yeah, exactly.
Very likely.
Exactly. So there, yeah, we're taking this all at face value, but there's not real reason to do that. But again, I'm assuming there was a historical Jesus, there was a mortal man, a rabbi who was a preacher, probably had a following of some kind, but was probably just a mortal guy who probably really got crucified and then, like I said, was buried somewhere, and we've never seen him again. But if he was the miracle man, you've got these apostles, 12 or 11 after Judas or however many they were. The obvious thing is, as soon as your Savior dies and his body vanishes and he's risen again, and then he ascends to heaven, the first thing you would do is document this thing to the max. You would get together with your fellow apostles, and you would write down everything that he said, and you would get the words straight, and you would document the stories, and you would get everything written down in black and white. just to make sure, because your man is gone and he's a miracle, he's gone to heaven. We got to document this. This would be the first thing. But no, what do we see? The 12 apostles, they vanish from the face of the earth. They're basically gone. There's a few little words in Acts, but pretty much they just disappear. They don't write anything. They go back to farming. They go back to fishing. I've made jokes about this in my classes. You can imagine these apostles seeing the crucifixion and the miracle, and then Jesus is risen. They go, wow, wasn't that amazing? Well, back to the fields. And they go back and they just become farmers again. They don't do anything.
So God sends his son to communicate with the world and wants to send his message so people have faith in him, but he can't even send his son to some people that are literate and that could write some stuff down and preserve it.
Exactly. Not only can the son doesn't write anything, so maybe he's illiterate himself. He doesn't talk to anybody who can write anything down, right? So all we're left with is Paul, who's a Jewish Pharisee, who supposedly 3 years after the crucifixion has this miracle vision, and then decides to write down who Jesus was, and he quotes the Lord's Prayer, even though he wasn't there. I don't know where he hears this from, right? He's quoting from rumor or whatever crazy stories you can think of, just the whole story, it just makes no sense. It's so implausible that anything like that would have happened. It's just ludicrous. So yeah, any rational person can't believe these things, right?
Paul, there's a verse here you have in your book, page 91. Except what Christ has wrought through me to win obedience from the Gentiles. Paul went to go convert the Gentiles so they will be obedient to the God of the Jews, the God that chose the Jews. It's just this is the propaganda epiphany that he or his cabal or whoever wrote these letters came up with. And he also says, like, replace your Roman idols. Like, there's an old Kabbalah belief that it's as above, so below. So if you have other cultures with other gods, if they stop worshiping them, they abandon their gods, and then they lose their, like, divine protection. So they were able to replace all the gods by their, like, substitute surrogate religion. And then and there's, like, a fatal flaw in it, a Trojan horse, so they can take it over when they want to at the end of their prophecies.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. You see things, how you're slaves to the elemental spirits, and come over to our side, right? You see this in Paul all the time, right? He's the apostle to the Gentiles. I mean, this is his self-proclaimed mission. He's going to carry the story to the Gentiles to get them to follow the Jewish rabbi, to believe in the Jewish rabbi, to believe in the Jewish God.
Why wasn't that Jesus' mission? Jesus said, what did Jesus say? I'm only for the lost sheep of Israel.
Yes, supposedly. We don't really know what Jesus said, actually. This is the funny part, right? All you're doing is dealing with secondhand information from literally 50 and 60 years later, right? Those passages don't show up into the Gospels, which is like in the 80s, and Jesus was dead in 30. So you've got decades have gone by. Nobody's documenting anything very well back then. How did these guys know in detail what Jesus said? They're claiming his mission. It's highly dubious at best,
So Paul's letters came before Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and Paul didn't know about any of the Gospels. He never referenced them at all. So you're trying to tell me that they never wrote anything down about all of these miraculous events. Nobody did until the Gospels 40, 50 years later.
Exactly.
That is really horrendous. I'd like to see anybody tell me that's not horrendous evidence. And the people that wrote the Gospels are not skeptical. They didn't even author it. They didn't date it. They had a bias and an agenda to spread this religion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this was amazing to me. This is one of the first things that really struck me is when you realize that these Pauline letters, whatever, they're supposedly 13, but at least half of them are forgeries. So you only have 6 or 7 that are legitimate. But even if you look at those, there's no mention of Gospels, the official Gospels at all. There's no quotations from Jesus. There's none of the story. There's no autobiography. There's nothing there. And It's clear that, when they do the dating of these things, Paul had no idea these Gospels because they didn't exist. The letters, all the Pauline letters date from about the year 50 AD to maybe mid-60s, maybe late 60s when Paul dies or is executed. Then the temple's destroyed in the year 70. And then you start to see the Gospels, because the first Gospel, Mark, is written about in the year 70 or shortly thereafter. And then about a decade later comes Matthew and Luke. And then about a decade after that comes John.
It could be way later, too. We are being very conservative with these datings. And we don't have, like, original copies from these times, from 90 or 100 AD. We don't have anything until, like, the 350s, which is... Imagine everything that could have changed since then. And then they just decide some books go in the canon, some don't. This is men, pagans, and Constantine meeting up to do these things. To believe all of this is the divine word of God is really a stretch.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's another astonishing fact, right? When you say, well, look, what's the oldest existing Bible, for example? And nobody knows this, right? And the oldest actual extant Bible is, as you said, from about the year 350 AD. It's the Vatican Codex. And that's the oldest complete Bible. So if you want to go back before that, we have little bits and pieces, literally fragments from the Gospels and fragments from Paul's letters. But I mean, they're literally scraps of paper, from the 200s or maybe even the 100s AD, literal scraps, and all they could do is pick out one phrase and they say, oh, that's from the Gospel of Luke or whatever. I mean, it's insane. You have a complete Bible that's not written until 350, which is literally 3 centuries after they were supposedly written, and we don't know what's going on in between. Who wrote what? Who made what changes? When were the changes made? For what reason? We know nothing. All you have is a Bible in the year 350 and little scraps of paper until then. It's a huge guesswork process. What I'm giving you is sort of the standard dates, but you're right. There's a lot of flexibility because we don't really know, just based on these little shreds of paper that we have today.
And why is God hiding? He came around, he spoke to people, he did miracles, he came in human form. Why is he hiding now, and all we have to do is believe these ancient books and story? Like, we use our rational, logical mind, and we can find all these issues and problems with all of this, and yet we're supposed to believe that if we don't just believe it on faith, that we're going to burn in hell forever? Like, it's not even, you can't even argue that that's moral. You talk about the carrot and stick approach in the book as well.
Well, right. I mean, so God's obviously a shifty bastard, right? Because he, 2 or 3 millennia ago, he would come down all the time and he would have chit chats with people and regular dialogues, read the Old Testament stuff, and he's talking to Job, he's talking to Moses, and it's just like a conversation, like between you and me. It was like an everyday thing. Oh, here's God. We're going to have a little chat, or his Son of God comes down. He's talking to people. That was like an everyday thing. And then pretty soon, like, that all goes away. And now there's no more God, and he's completely disappeared. There's no more stories, no more miracles, no more, burning bushes and, big voices booming from the clouds and all these things. It's just nothing, which makes you think there's a lot more baloney in this whole story, even than we're giving them credit for. I mean, I'm trying to be sympathetic here, but it's really hard when you see the situation today.
If you realize that it's not true, then you got to ask, who was behind it? Why did they do it? What is the motive? What's the purpose? And to believe that Jesus is just up in heaven looking down at all of the suffering and all the mayhem and the wars and genocides, and he's just going, not yet, can't come down and save you yet. You need a few more wars, a few more plagues. You need Armageddon. You gotta help the Jews take over first and worship them. Then he'll come. Please,
yeah, exactly.
Please, people.
Right. Yeah, you're basically, that's right. It's like the problem of evil, right? Which is a classic major difficulty for any concept of a moral or just God. Is it's all virtually inexplicable how all this pain and suffering happens to innocent people and children and people who are in no position to believe in Jesus, and they're dying horrible deaths and so forth. I mean, just horrendous sort of pain and suffering in the world that could be easily mitigated or completely eliminated by a moral God, which clearly doesn't happen. So the obvious conclusion is there's no such thing as a moral God, and that blows the whole biblical God concept and Jesus concept. That blows it out of the water right there. So yeah.
What kind of God has a divine plan where he creates Adam and Eve to fall victim to the serpent immediately, and then he populates the world and then has to kill everybody in the world but one family, and then he has to choose one people above all other people and speak terribly about the Gentiles? I don't know why any Gentile would ever want to worship the God after the things he says in the Old Testament, and then choose people, and then have him choose people to just reject the Messiah that he was going to send to him. And then people just have to believe in this, and then now you'll be saved with the promise of eternal life. You get your reward after you die.
Yeah.
You guys don't feel like you're being conned by these script writers? I feel like they wrote a script 2,000 years ago, and they're using it to control the dialectic to fulfill their prophecies. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. From A to Z, start to finish. I mean, it's such an absurd story that, it's been refuted. Whatever little bits of science are in there, it's been completely refuted by science, and the astronomy is wrong, and the origins are wrong. And I mean, everything about it is wrong. So there's really no real integrity to the story from the earliest parts of Genesis right through the end of the Revelation at the end of the New Testament. I mean, it's just really a bunch of nonsense and speculation and wishful thinking and mythology and so forth. And and for people to take it literally is so absurd, and it's so crazy for any sort of rational person. I mean, it sort of drives you crazy. I've had people tell me, well, that's why you have to have faith, because it's such an absurd story that only a believer could believe it. I mean, that's like the definition of insanity, right? I'll think of the stupidest, most ridiculous story I can, and then I just want you to believe it just to prove your faith, right?
Well, they also say you have to have the faith, and then you'll see the truth, and then you'll know, and then you'll understand. And Christians love to say it's like Dunning-Kruger effect. They don't realize how dumb they are sometimes. They say, "Oh, Adam and David, you don't understand. You have to understand it to be able to interpret it. You don't understand what it means." We understand it all very well, much more than so many millions of Christians around the world, at the least.
Yeah, it's crazy. When I used to teach this stuff in my philosophy class, I had lots of obviously religious students, and I had quite a few Muslim students actually too. And so they were big on this faith aspect. And I would say, well, look, I want you guys, here's a test. I want you to have just faith that I'm God, me right here. I'm God. And I can't prove it because I can't do miracles. And I can't. I have no real power except I have power over your grade. So that's pretty good. So I just want you to believe that I'm God, and I can't give you any evidence, but just believe it, just because I would like it. It would be nice for me if you believed it. So, and of course they laugh at me, right? Well, that's ridiculous. Oh, we're not going to believe that you're God. Well, okay, but you can see me. At least I'm real and I'm tangible. You got much more basis to believe me being God than any God in some 2,000-year-old book that was based on 3,000-year-old mythology, which is total nonsense in the first place.
There's a huge faction of Christians that don't like the Judeo-Christian term. They like to say that Jesus wasn't Jewish because they've got antipathy for Judaism, which I would understand because Judaism hates their Lord and Savior, and but they love to say you go into some of the details about how Jewish Jesus actually is and how it's just completely indisputable that all of this is Jewish. Christianity use the same term that I've used, an intra-Jewish squabble, arguing about who the Moshiach is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you're right. I mean, if we can take what's stated in the Gospels as any kind of record of this fellow, this man who was Jesus of Nazareth, then yeah, it's clear 100% he was Jewish. I mean, there's countless statements they're calling him rabbi, and his mother Mary was, born under the law, and he was a father-in-law, and he went to the Passover for 3 years, I mean, yeah, people call him King of the Jews. I mean, there's multiple passages that are all targeting Jesus and saying, yeah, I mean, Joseph was from the tribe of Judah and so forth. So, I mean, if we accept that as any kind of integrity of the story of this fellow, you have to accept that he was Jewish all the way around.
You can't be rejected as the Jewish prophesized Messiah if you're not Jewish. And also, I love the verse in there that really, I think, proves it. Nobody could argue. Jesus was handed over to the Gentiles. So that means he's not Gentiles if he's going over to the Gentiles. Right. And there's so much coping going on this topic. Meanwhile, the majority of all Christianity all just knows this. Oh, Jesus was a Jew. Yeah, we're Judeo-Christians.
Yeah, well, that's right. Exactly. I mean, it's funny that somehow people know this, but they don't really want to admit it, right? I mean, they're like, how can Jesus be a Jew? He's a Christian. He was like the first Christian. He's the real Christian. He can't be a Jew. And I think it partly it plays on this distinction of Jewishness really has two factors, right? Two aspects to it, and it's important to be clear, right? So on the one hand, to be a follower of Judaism, the religion, makes you a Jew, and the other reference is an ethnic one, or a racial description of the people who are the ethnic Jews, right? They're like Italians or Germans or the British, right? I mean, that's an ethnic characterization. So you have ethnic Jews and you have religious Jews. So Jesus was, if he was a real man, was certainly an ethnic Jew, biologically. Now, maybe religiously, he may have had a different view. Maybe he had his own sort of take. Maybe he was like the first Christian. But that doesn't change the fact that biologically, ethnically, he was Jewish.
It's semantics. If he came to not change like one letter of the law, he's the fulfillment of the law. He worships, his father is Yahweh, the God of the, he is the new covenant. That means, the Jewish old covenant. It's all completely Jewish. And to most people out there, this is not even disputable. They don't even object to it. Just, it's like the small amount of fringe anti-Zionist, anti-Jewish Christians that do this, and it's really pathetic if you ask me. How about the slave morality and the cult-like dictates of Paul? Right about that as well.
Yeah, right. So he has to build this movement, right, which has to be a counter-Roman movement, and it has to be sort of surreptitious. It has to sort of be an underground movement. It has to be committed to the movement, sort of, full bore, heart and soul, right? There's these passages, you have to leave your father and your mother and your brothers and sisters and come to the side of Jesus, and then you're saved. I mean, it's this total, absolute commitment to this Jesus cause, which by any other name would be literally a cult. The Romans, when they referred to these Jewish Christians, they used the Latin for cult, cultionis. It was a Latin word. They called it a cult, literally. That's how they viewed these people. They were so fanatic and so, kind of mindlessly believing in this cause, which, yeah, I mean, we would sort of, have these people sort of, locked up or taken away for medical treatment today. But back then it passed as a religious movement.
Here's a good question in the chat I just saw, and I'm looking at the chats to if you guys have good questions. You think the Bible is the greatest book in the world?
The greatest book.
Most influential, the greatest phenomena, the most powerful. What would you say? Yeah,
well, that's that. Okay. Certainly influential, right? I guess you could argue because of the Judeo-Christian thread that runs through all of Europe, which is the backbone of Western civilization. So in that sense, you could say, yeah, sure, the Bible maybe is in a sense maybe the most important book sort of historically.
You start the book by saying Jesus is the most influential figure in all of history.
Yeah, right. So when I was referring to a couple of surveys that are typically taken, and if they look at all the historical figures throughout time, and it goes back to the ancient Greeks, and they're typically, Jesus is 1, 2, 3, along with Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and Newton or whoever. So yeah, they're treating Jesus like a real person, and he's traditionally one of the most influential people in history, just because of the consequences in Europe, European culture, Western culture in general, and then the influence throughout the whole world. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt it was important. To me, it's doubly important because the whole thing was based on a lie and a fraud. So that makes it really sort of an astoundingly important story for everyone to really understand what's going on here.
Do you think Christianity has ultimately been good for the Gentile world, or just for the whole world, Gentiles and Jews? Do you think we would have been better off if the Abrahamic religions didn't come around?
Yeah, it's been a disaster, I think, for the Gentile world, for the Western world. I've heard people say that, well, look at the great things that were accomplished in Renaissance Europe, in the Baroque period, and they were very devout worshipers, and look what great things, the great art and the music and so forth, the Michelangelo paintings and so forth. But to me, there's no causal link there. I mean, that's people with a native creative power who are using the themes of the day to make paintings and music and stories and so forth. So to me, the creativity and the power comes from the people themselves. I mean, you're dealing with very creative, intrinsically artistic and creative people in the Europeans of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. And it just happened to be in a Christian context. If anything, the Christian values held them down, right? I mean, and this is again, it's a long story. It goes back to Nietzsche at least, where it's just these degrading values where you're really putting, if you really believe it, you're putting all the importance in the future life, a life that does not exist. You can never know that it exists until you're dead. This life, the life that you're actually living, is a sort of a degraded life. It's pain and suffering and sin and ultimately death. So this life really is devalued, and the true value in the world is pushed into this mythical afterlife, this life that really does not exist. And Nietzsche has some great passages on this. I mean, he talks about this as being true nihilism. People accuse Nietzsche of being a nihilist, but that's wrong. He was saying the Christians are the nihilists because they believe in nothingness. They believe in a God, in an afterlife, in a soul, in a heaven and a hell. These are nothing. These are fables. These are fictions. And the Christians believe in them, and they drive their lives according to them. Those guys are the ultimate nihilists. And you could say, well, look, there's been a tremendous cost to European culture, even way back at the Roman Empire. If we can pin some of the collapse of the Roman Empire on this Christian morality, which degraded this world and put all value in an illusory future world, I mean, the cost has been unfathomable, right? Incalculable, the cost to Western civilization, European civilization, because of this sort of corrupt Christian ideology.
How can you guys not understand that getting the non-Jews to be sheep in a flock following a Jewish Messiah that worships Yahweh and spreads the Torah around the world doesn't completely play into the hands of the chosen ones? I'd like to see questions, guys. I'm looking at the chat for some questions. We got another 20 minutes or so. You write about Philo's another one. Philo the Jew, who wrote about the Logos, which is actually turned up in John, never wrote about Jesus. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so Philo was a prominent Jewish philosopher, writer who lived just during the time of Jesus. I think he was born just prior to, I forgot the dates, prior to the year 0, lived throughout that whole period. He was based, I think, mostly in Alexandria, so he would have maybe had secondhand knowledge, but he was certainly aware of what was going on, sort of a brilliant thinker and writer. He wrote volumes. I don't know, there's basically an encyclopedia of extant writings by Philo. And so he's writing on everything under the sun, Jewish ideas and philosophy and history and so forth, and there's nothing. I mean, you can go through all these documents, these books of Philo, and there's no mention of the Jewish Savior Jesus who's come and who's working the miracles, and I mean, just nothing. So I mean, it's astounding, another astounding lack of confirmation that anything like this happened, anything extraordinary happened. It surely would have showed up there, but it didn't. Yep.
I see in the chat somebody spreading some disinformation. They said Josephus wrote heavily about historical Jesus. I've seen memes that Christians share. They go, oh, Jesus isn't true. Look at all these people. They list out all of these people who mentioned Jesus. There's so many problems with these names. I'm telling you, if you haven't read these books where real academics go through and investigate these things, there's so many ancient writers that could have and should have wrote about Jesus that never did. And you're trying to tell me that the best that God could do to share his gospel, the good news, is everything that we're laying out for you right now? If God really wanted to communicate his message to the world, does he not have the power to do it with clarity to everybody all at once at any time? So we have thousands of denominations and wild parables and allegories and different interpretations. I mean, it's so obviously man-made. You have a chapter about how the Jews made God in their image, and you That's the thing about you compared to other Christian researchers is they all like to take it easy on the chosen ones a little bit, whereas you follow the truth where it goes. I've noticed that.
Well, right. So to me, I'm trying to just lay it all out there and follow the evidence and just be very blunt and honest about it. You have skeptics and you have Jesus critics and you have mythicists out there like Robert Price and Richard Carrier and some other these fellows who they make big business, promoting a Jesus myth of some sort. But it's funny how they never really get around to talking about the Jewish angle, the role that the Jews had, the conflict of the Jews with Rome, the Jewish antipathy towards the Romans and towards all Gentiles, and how that might have played a part in this little story that God constructed. They generally believe it was constructed, but they'll paper over things and they'll say, no, the letters from Paul really came, in the 100 years later. They were in the 50s, they were in the 150s. It was by Martian. It wasn't by the Jews at all. I mean, they'll come up with every sort of crazy story possible to try to deflect the discussion from the Jews, but those guys are front and center, and they're passing over bogus stories, and unless you're willing to confront that story directly, I don't know. I mean, you lose a lot of integrity as far as I'm concerned.
And also, I think they need to take into account everything that's transpired in the last 2,000 years. And hindsight is 2020. We see all of our leaders in America, one of the most powerful nations in the world, going over to Israel, bowing down in front of their wall, calling the Jews and Israel, God's holy land and chosen people and stuff like that. They consider America is Edom, is the new Rome, and they've got us basically as slaves. And that's the role that they want for Gentiles in Judaism.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're more or less doing their bidding. We're pumping them billions of dollars a year. I mean, it's just insane, right? We cover for them politically. We cover for them militarily. We veto resolutions against them in the UN.
Christians all over the world believe you're cursed if you curse them, and you're blessed if you bless them. That's not the most powerful con in. Yeah. I don't know what is. Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of astonishing. I mean, this is one thing that people have pushed back on me, and they said, this thesis is kind of so radical and controversial, and why haven't we heard about this more? And I said, well, look, who are you going to hear it from? You're going to hear it from our media? No, because we have a strong Jewish influence in the American media. You've got politicians who are bought basically by Jewish money. It flows through AIPAC. It's documented that between a third and a half of all political donation money comes from Jewish sources. So
many of them are true believers, and they help promote the people that are true believers that they're chosen.
Exactly. So you have some Christian Zionists mixed in there as well, who just sort of believe the story. The ones who don't, they're just following the money, and they're saying, "Hey, look, I'm getting all my money from these guys, and I'm not gonna go against them." So, I mean, in retrospect, it's actually not that surprising that you don't hear this story promoted, because there's a lot of interest to not talk about this. I mean, it reflects badly on the Jewish role and what they're willing to stoop to, and how they continue to cover up the story. And then you're wondering, well, what other stories are being covered up, and what are the things that our media and our politicians not telling us about, because they're really bought and paid for by these guys. So it brings up a lot of troubling issues, and you can see why there's a lot of resistance to anything like this this Jesus hoax story.
It's such a powerful hoax that it's got Christians in the chat right now saying you're an antichrist, you reject Jesus, you don't accept the Jewish Messiah. They're so brainwashed that they're calling us, they say Jews hate Jesus. No, they don't. Find me a Jew that says that says what we're saying, that they created it on purpose to deceive the Gentiles. They don't say that. You write about this. You want to? I can let you comment.
Yeah, no, right, exactly. I mean, it looks terrible. So they're not going to tell you this story. It's too incriminating. So you won't hear it from the Jewish authors and the Jewish skeptics. They'll tell you other stories. They may not believe the Christian story. They may not believe in Jesus, but they don't hate him. They probably love the results because it yields tremendous benefits for the Jewish American community and Israel at large.
And some of those benefits have been to be persecuted as well, because they have that the victim complex that benefits them ultimately. So they don't. There's not Jews out there that are saying Jesus is a myth. He never existed. Just some ancient Jews made it up. They don't say that. They say, oh, he just wasn't the Messiah, or it was the Romans that killed him. But they don't say that. And it's so amazing to me that there's Christians out there that say, oh, if we don't believe in Jewish messianism and Yahweh and the Torah and the first covenant and all of that, then you're a Jew. That's how much of a mental prison these people are in. They're calling us Jewish for not believing in the King of the Jews and the Jewish Messiah. Come on, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, one of my fellow professors at the university called me a Zionist. He said, I think you're a Zionist because, you know, this talk you're going around, it's really promoting the Zionist cause. I'm like, I don't think so. If I am, I'm pretty darn brainwashed if I am. But
you should tell Canary Mission that for attacking you about BDS, that you're such a Zionist.
Right, exactly. I've been promoting boycott, divestment, sanctions against Israel for, literally over a decade. And so, that doesn't earn me any friends among the Jewish community, for sure.
Do you think Judaism would still be around if it weren't for Christianity?
Probably.
Pagans were throwing them out. Pagans weren't having it.
Yeah. But again, there were centuries of conflict before there was a Christian story at all. So there was always this struggle. There was always the conflict. The Jews hated the neighbors. The neighbors hated the Jews. And, I think probably that pressure would have kept the Jewish community together, would have kept Judaism going. Those guys they're super fanatics. They're going to document their stories and carry them on through the ages. So, I have no reason to think there wouldn't be a Judaism still today.
Would they have the power that they have today?
Well, that's the question. Exactly right. They succeeded in probably beyond their wildest dreams through this Jesus stories, which brought them tremendous wealth and power. Again, if you look at the ancient record, they did have. They always sort of played this game. They had different ways of sucking up to power and becoming the traders and the financiers and working on the leaders and the rulers and the kings. So they had various multiple strategies of working their way into power positions. Obviously probably it helped to get the masses believing this Christian story and believing in the Jewish God and the Jewish rabbi. Certainly that helped, but they probably had levers of power that they would have exercised in any case. That would be my guess.
What about some of the subversive, terrible advice in the New Testament for humans, like some of the ones that Paul talks about, leaving your family, giving away all your wealth? You got them all listed here in the book. Some good ones. What's the other one? The last will be first. It's kind of like it's trying to get all of the poor people in Palestine to everybody to unite against the pagans in Rome, right?
Well, right. So this is the idea that Paul and his friends are appealing to these lowly masses, right? So it might have been the indigenous Arabs. So they weren't Romans, they weren't Greeks. They lived in that area for hundreds of years. They may or may not have liked the Roman rule. You don't really know, but they were sort of the bottom rung of society, and somehow Paul realizes he can get these low enders. He can pull them into his system and get them to sort of be rabble rousers and opponents, because these people don't have power. They have nothing to lose. Maybe they stand to win something if they can, overthrow these invaders. They're superstitious. They can be frightened with the concept of hell. They can be tempted with the idea of heaven. So he thinks this is the malleable masses that he's going to work on. And so you see it in the stories, right? The low, the humble, the meek, the mild. These are blessed. God loves you, people. You're just join us. Come on the Jesus side, and hey, you got eternal life. So it makes sense. It was good strategy. You got to give it to Paul. He had the right strategy.
It has worked incredibly well. How effective it has been. Seeing today. Okay, I have a clip of a rabbi here. I think you're gonna like this. He's basically alluding to the idea that God has a plan with Christianity and Islam. Check this out. Oh, actually, let me stop sharing and then reshare. Whenever I start the stream, it cuts out the sound. Okay, here we go.
Now, Esau, as evil as he was to the people of Israel, Nevertheless, the nation of Edom, the nation, Christianity, and other nations came from him. And they
came from him. That means Christianity came from Abraham, came from God, came from Yahweh, part of the plan. And he said Christianity is Edom, that's Esau.
They don't worship idols like
no idol worship
in the old time.
Except that they do believe that Jesus is still idol worship. They're trying to Judaize it more and turn him to Noahides. I won't interrupt again.
And there was not that much wickedness in Christianity. There are many good things also, especially that they believe that they worship one God who has a son. But that's already something else. Same thing also with Ishmael. Ishmael became the enemy of the Jewish people. How much we suffer, even today we suffer from them so much. But at the same time, he is the father of that nation which was to become the Islam, to give to the world the Islam. And Islam...
Just to pause for you, this is Times of Israel. This is what the Orthodox believe. Edom and Ishmael is Christianity and Islam. Ishmael is the waste product of Abraham. Esau is the waste product of Isaac. Edom is the waste product of Israel. That's what they think of these dialectical derivative religions. We are their waste product. It's so supremacist.
It's funny, but they're all related, right? I mean, you know, Esau and Jacob are brothers. Isaac and Ishmael are brothers. I mean, it's a family thing, and yet here's this oppositional structure going on. It's like crazy.
Well, they believe one is evil. Ishmael was the bastard son with Hagar, and Esau inherited the serpent, the hatred that Cain had for Abel. That's what they believe. Here we go.
Worshipping. It's the worship of one God. According to Maimonides, it is a kind of worship that is crazy. But still, it's not anymore idol worshipping. Christianity is considered idols worshipping. It's Avodah Zarah, but not Islam. So, but nevertheless, we must admit that they brought to the world changes from the old time in which there was plenty of wickedness, right? And that's why God gave us from the womb of such righteous people who became the enemies of the Jewish people, who made the Jewish people suffer very much. Remember, not many people think about this. From the womb of Rivka came out two different nations, one good, one bad. From the womb of from Abraham came out Yitzchak and Ishmael. What's going on? Trust Hashem, He knows what He does.
There's a plan.
That, as we know, our sages said that Ishmael did teshuvah. Esav, nothing is said about him.
Esau gets destroyed.
At the end, the nations will become one, will join the Jewish people. I don't want to say much more about that, but our prophets were very clear about that.
Do you see what I'm saying there? How he's alluding to the idea that these religions are part of a bigger plan and that they came from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's their genealogy. They've mapped out the whole system. So you've got these family relationships and these Manichaean distinctions between the evil brother and the good brother, and these these struggles between these two, and yeah, all right. I mean, the whole story. It's a Jewish structure, top to bottom.
And they see it as improving, replacing the pagan religions. Maimonides, this is the top rabbi, in the year 1200, wrote this. Both Islam and Christianity are far better than the pagan religions. And then it also says that they're a stepping stone. One more clip of a rabbi I want to show you. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to say, well, that's nonsense, right? I mean, because you can go back to sort of the foundation of Western philosophy. So you go back to the writings of Plato and Aristotle.
Yeah.
I mean, that's vastly superior to any of these Jewish mythologies that they've been constructing. It's like absurd to call it a pagan religion. That's the philosophical foundations of rational Western thought. sort of the basis of everything, and that is completely independent of this Jewish theology, and it's way pre-Christian. So it's absurd to say, to call everything else some kind of pagan religion, right?
Yeah. Well, they adopted many pagan myths and incorporated them into Judaism so that they could lure in the Romans, the Greco-Romans, and the pagans. So this is a clip I see how Christians enable Jews. One, with their persecution, because they believe that Jews killed Jesus. They persecute them like Esau is supposed to do. They keep them separate. They keep them believing. If all these Christians believe in the new covenant, then that means the old covenant must be real. Listen to what this rabbi says. He uses Christians believing in their Torah as evidence that it's true.
And the Torah is full of prophecies, so that's why the Goyim could never deny the validity of the Torah. Never the Christian tried to say that the Jews never got the Torah from God. Never. They actually said, we are testifying that God gave you the Torah and you are the chosen people. Why? They don't love us. They're not crazy about us. You see what they do to us now every day.
So it benefits them. Before we get to questions, I want to also mention you've, and I saw it in the comments, you've written a number of books. This is just the latest, and you said you're working on a updated version, correct?
Yeah, I'm collecting material to do a second expanded edition of the Jesus Hoax. I hope to have it out by the end of the year, so it'll be a while yet. But the current one is available in paperback, and ebook is out there for anyone who's interested.
Have you seen this one yet? Have you seen this clip?
No, I don't think so.
Watch this. Here's the Jewish subversion. Ready?
Every good thing we know, all the things we love about the Bible, they were given to us of the Jewish nation. Israel, their people, the Jews, are better than all of us. They're better than all of us. And you need to accept that. A lot of people hate Israel. What
do you think of that? Is Christianity not playing into the hands of the Jews when you see something like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a sort of insanity right there. It's belied by 2,000 years of history. So
yeah. Okay. Here's a suggestion I have for the new edition of the book, Marcus Eli Ravage, a real case against the Jews. I just screen recorded some of the highlights from this from Christopher John Bjerknes's book, Beware the World to Come. I'm going to share that. I'm going to post that for all you guys to watch, the whole Eli Ravage, and for you too as well, David. But this is just one of the highlights. This is a Rothschild biographer, wrote it in 1928. Excuse me?
Yeah, I was going to say I read through the whole piece. There's a part one, part two. It's a two-part article that was published in 1928, January, February. I read through it the other day. It's a great piece. I probably will put it like an appendix in the next edition of my book because I really like it. And it really does. It really sort of gives the essence of this Jesus hoax story. He doesn't have the specifics, again, because he doesn't have the archaeological data that we have today. But he's got the basic story is right. He's admitting that, yes, it was a Jewish hoax. He's drawing from people like Edward Gibbon, who said, look, it was the Jews defeated the Roman Empire. And I think, I'd really like to know, but I think he's really stealing from Nietzsche. He pulls a lot of ideas right from Nietzsche's Antichrist, but without mentioning Nietzsche. But I see a lot of parallels there. So I'm guessing he probably was aware of Nietzsche's writings, knew that bit about Gibbon, and then constructed this nice little essay. It's a really great little essay, and it really gives the essence of the Jesus hoax story.
He might have got it from Benjamin Disraeli, who I think he was the Prime Minister of England. He was Jewish. Somebody sent me his book recently. I haven't got to it yet, but Bjerknes has some quotes from him as well. Yeah. I wonder if it's in this book. I haven't got to it yet, but Benjamin Disraeli also says some similar things. I just want to, I'm glad that you read it. I still want to just play it before we wrap it up here another 15 minutes for the audience to see, because this is powerful.
Sure.
We made you the willing and unconscious bearers of our mission to the whole world, to the barbarous races of the earth, to the countless unborn generations. Without fully understanding what we were doing to you, you became the agents at large of our racial tradition, carrying our gospels to the unexplored ends of the earth. Our tribal customs have become the core of your moral code. Our tribal laws have furnished the basic groundwork of all your august constitutions and legal systems. Our legends and our folktales are the sacred lore which you croon to your infants. Our poets have filled your hymnals and your prayer books. Our national history has become an indispensable part of the learning of your pastors and priests and scholars. Our kings, our statesmen, our prophets, our warriors are your heroes. Our little...
And we abandon all of our European cultures and myths and that kind of stuff, and replaced it with all of theirs and their fictitious history, where they're the chosen ones. It's incredible.
Ancient country is your holy land. Our national literature is your holy Bible. What our people thought and taught have become inextricably woven into your very speech and tradition until no one among you can be called educated who is not familiar with our racial heritage. Jewish artisans and Jewish fishermen are your teachers and your saints, with countless statues carved in their image and innumerable cathedrals raised to their memories. A Jewish maiden is your ideal of motherhood and womanhood. A Jewish rebel prophet is the central figure in your religious worship. We have pulled down your idols, cast aside your racial inheritance, and substituted for them our God and our traditions. No conquest in history can even remotely compare with this clean sweep of our conquest over you.
There you have it. They're trying to tell you.
100 years ago, he was saying this, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So.
All right. I appreciate you coming on. I hope we get a couple good questions before we have here. Your book is available. There we go. Your book is available on Amazon. Do you sell it elsewhere too? Is there alternatives to Amazon?
Yeah, it's carried on multiple bookseller websites. Yeah, Jesus Hoax. It's not a big book. It's pretty inexpensive. There's an ebook version out there from a couple of sites. So easy to find and easy to get a hold of. Easy to read. Does not require a lot of background. I try to lay it all out in very clear terms.
Yeah, it's like what, just about 100 pages. You do such an excellent job. It's so easily digestible and consumable for a lot of people. And I can tell you've read a lot of the same books I have and compiled just the best stuff, and then also tied it together of who actually was behind it and why they did it. That's the most important part.
Yeah.
All right, all the links for you will be down below in the description. I really suggest you guys pick it up. Get out of your comfort zone. I understand that this is a bitter pill to swallow. I hadn't even thought of this concept of it being an intentional hoax until maybe about a year ago when I started researching this with an open mind for myself. And let's get some good questions here from the chat. Please, questions in all caps. I'm going to check out the paid ones too. Have you read John Lamb Lash? I guess that's one of the questions.
I'm familiar with him a little bit. Seems like I've come across some of the titles of his books. He writes about a lot of mythology.
Yeah.
Right.
He's like a believing Gnostic. People try to say, oh, Adam's anti-Christian, he's a Gnostic. I do not believe in Jewish Gnosticism and any of these myths at all. I just acknowledge when they were around and how they influenced later religions. But yeah, he does talk about replacing Christianity, basically being replacing European history.
Yeah.
In a bad way.
I think John buys into some of the mythology more than I do. I mean, I'm sort of more in the secular rationalist camp, and John's a little bit more wide-ranging from what I can tell from his works. But yeah, it's an interesting critique though as well.
And I was going to show you something else too. Subjugated the serpent. Yeah, I talked to you offline about Yom Kippur. Oh, here's another one that I want you to see. What's this?
Matter manipulation was used also responsibly most notably, and this is a little controversial because a lot of people want to deny this happened.
The Kabbalah rabbi.
But the first pope was actually a Jewish scholar. And this first pope, who was this great scholar, he was not a pope, he was a rabbi living in Jaffa. He was a fisherman. And to this day, the pope wears a ring that has a fisherman on it from this first pope. But the first pope was actually just a great rabbi. And the Jews were being terribly hassled by the early Christians who were hanging around Israel.
So they have all these rabbis basically saying, just confessing how Jewish all of Christianity is and how it was all Jews that came up with it. Okay, I saw a good question just come by. Where was it? People are saying, what is the new world religion going to be? They want it to be the Kabbalists, and they want it to be Noahides. We're not promoting Noahides. We're promoting the Abrahamic religions are a lie. They're made up. It's Jewish mythology. That's where I'm coming from. I don't reject Jesus. I reject the whole notion of a Messiah coming to save the Jews from Rome, basically.
Right, which is 2,000 years old in any case, right? So it's completely irrelevant. The idea of a guy is going to come down and save you is just ludicrous, right? So, there's some basic codes of morality that are there in any basic rational system. So there's nothing magic or miraculous about some of the commandments or even the Noahide laws. I mean, some of them are sort of common sense stuff, thou shalt not kill and so forth. I mean, it's pretty obvious basic codes of morality that would have existed in any civilization at any time. So, imagine
not knowing that killing's wrong without having it be in the Ten Commandments. Yeah. And how did society ever function without people knowing that was wrong?
How do we do it without the Ten Commandments? I don't know. We would have just crumbled to pieces, man. I don't know.
We have Maz Arabia says, free Palestine. She says, no surrender. Mr. David, where can we learn more? Your websites, I'll put all the links below. What's your website? The davidskirba.com?
davidskrbina.com. It's got all my books there. And some mention of some of the articles that I've published. Yeah, I've written, like I said.
Tell us about the Unabomber. You've done work on the Unabomber. Tell us about that.
Right. So, as a professional philosopher, I've got different areas of interest. One of them is social political philosophy, philosophy of mind, religious philosophy, and philosophy of technology. So I've been a longtime critic of technology, been very sympathetic to anti-technology arguments and works along those lines. I constructed a course called Philosophy of Technology at University of Michigan. I used bits and pieces from the Unabomber's writings because it was relevant. He gave a great critique of technology, and I started corresponding with him, and over a period of years, received well over 100 letters from him, sort of documenting this case against technology. So, yeah.
Wow. I saw in the chat that they're asking, does the Shroud of Turin prove Jesus was real? I don't even know if that's a troll question or not.
No, of course not. It's been dated to the 1300s or something. I think at last check. It's just another bogus icon, like the little bits of bone and cloth, that they got in their little sacred bottles in the cathedrals in Europe. It's who knows really what it is, where it came from. It's no evidence at all.
Do you think we're going to be able to wake up to these Christians that they've been deceived? Because it's harder it's easier to fool somebody than to convince them they've been fooled. Their whole identity is caught up in this. It is their crutch, almost their addiction. How do you think this is a hard task, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, it's a good point, right? I mean, I've had a couple of debates with Catholic theologians and religious people and so forth, and these really committed Christians, they really take it as a personal affront, and they have a really hard time dealing with the facts and the rational basis for the argument. But I view it as a positive sign. I continue to sort of track how Christianity is received in the modern world, and particularly in the United States. When I published the Jesus Hoax book, on the first page I made a statement that something like 77% of Americans call themselves Christians. And then I pulled up a story from just the other day off the internet and said the current figure is 65% call themselves Christians. This is a huge reduction, 12 percentage points in less than a decade of Americans who call themselves Christians. So I mean, really the numbers are plummeting, and you got to view that obviously as a good sign that people are sort of abandoning this kind of corrupt and bogus theology, and they're going in different directions, or maybe they're just being generically spiritual or whatever. But yeah, any way you slice it, decline in Christianity, that's good news, and it can only bring people around to more realistic views of the world.
I know how difficult it is. People are stuck in their comforting echo chambers with groupthink. This causes them cognitive dissonance. It's a difficult thing to do, but it's almost like humans naturally want to almost follow an alpha male or follow a shepherd and be sheep. If they see that everybody is going in another direction, they don't like to be get out of line. They'll probably follow too. What do you think about that?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just sort of comforting to follow along with somebody without really having to do the hard work of thinking, because, whatever, people are busy and things are stressful, and you're dealing with pandemics and God knows what else is going on, right? And it's just a lot easier just to say, I'm just going to believe this stuff and I'm just going to follow, and I won't have to do the hard work of research and critical thinking and change my views, because I was taught this since I was little, and my whole family believes this stuff, and I just believed it from as long as I can remember. I was going to church with mom and dad, and there's a famous passage in Bertrand Russell when he asked people, he said, why do people believe this nonsense about Christianity? And it's just, well, we were raised that way from youth, and you just believe things.
Were you?
You don't question. Well, no, it's a kind of interesting. So I was sort of, I say, raised Presbyterian. Uh-huh. But Presbyterian, if you're familiar, is about the weakest, most watered-down form of Christianity that there is. And my parents, sort of took me there once a month, maybe, when I was little. I never really understood what was going on, didn't really believe it, into a little Sunday school thing, and had fun with the other kids there, and that was about it. But by the time I was, early teens, for sure, we just sort of dropped out altogether. So I never had that pressure from my parents to actually believe anything. They were sort of independent thinkers, fortunately, and allowed me to think on my own, which was a great thing.
What do you think about, do you think mocking and ridiculing Christians is an effective way to kind of pressure them to change their stance?
Well, you prefer not to do that to anybody, right? I mean,
if you just explain their beliefs and then show how bizarre they are, if they're uncomfortable with their own beliefs, then maybe instead of getting mad at us, you should just change your beliefs. So in that way, mocking and ridicule makes them feel uncomfortable. It could work.
Yeah, I suppose, right? I mean, you do try to lay out the absurdities and make it very clear how impossible these things really are in any kind of rational sense. And you just try to drive people to come to semi-logical conclusions, and it's interesting. I used to do that all the time with students. I would have a typical mix of students, and some who were very religious, and I would just kind of step by step walk them through the logic, and then they're backed into a corner and they get really sort of antsy and uncomfortable, and then they just sort of give up or shut down, because at some point you have really nothing to say. Well, it's just how it is, or I just believe it, or I don't care about that, or they just sort of throw up their hands. But
we're trying to help you. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, it's an education process. That's how I've viewed it. I mean, I'm a professor. I like to teach people, and I like to educate them and bring some kind of enlightenment to them. So I'm not doing it in a sense of hostility. I'm trying to get people to think critically and think deeply and look at the consequences. And there's been some very negative consequences of this particular story, and it's really important that people understand that, and they're just not hearing that story today.
They don't want to hear it. Yeah, we're trying to help you. We're trying to liberate you from Yahweh's psychopathic death grip that plays in, that's Judaized the world, and that's playing into the Judeo temple cult. It's like a death cult. They want Armageddon. They want they're obsessed about the afterlife, dying basically. And instead of enjoying this life, they're thinking about the afterlife. And Paul even has a line in your book I just saw where it's like, care not for this life, but like, you know, your treasures are in the afterlife, something along those lines. It's sure. So you're a philosopher.
Devalues this world, which is a tragedy, right? I mean, realistically, this is your life. This is your one chance, and you need to make it the best life you can. So, yeah.
How would you compare and contrast like Christian, or I should say Bible philosophy compared to like pagan philosophy, like the Greeks and the Romans and, you know, whoever else you've studied? Which one's better in your opinion?
Well, right. So, I mean, to me, Western philosophy is far superior, right? I mean, it's based in mythology. You can go back to Homeric times, and you can look at the Iliad and the Odyssey, and you've got sort of nice stories about the gods and goddesses and how they played havoc in the world and interacted with people. And you had the demigods even in, I mean, that was one thing I mentioned in my book, actually, this idea of a demigod. Jesus is half God, half human. And that's a very old story. There's dozens of these demigods in Homer, which comes from 800 BC. So this idea of a demigod come to Earth, that's a very old story. So
I've heard actually Jesus is 100% man, 100% God. I've heard that as well too.
All right.
Not
50,
math
50,
experts.
100 under 100. Okay, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, there was so much progress when you study the ancient Greeks, you study the pre-Socratics, you study Aristotle, Plato, and Socrates in particular. I mean, they laid the groundwork for all of Western civilization, and they did it in a non-mythological, non-theological way. I mean, they were sort of open to the possibility, and they talked about the gods in some kind of loose sense, but they weren't going to temples and praying and bedding down on their knees and asking for forgiveness. I mean, there was none of that. Absolutely nothing like that. So the foundations of this excellent life, outstanding life, which flourished in Rome, it flourished in Athens, in the ancient world. It's all there. You just have to sort of learn the text and understand the background, and then you can see where we went wrong with the Christian advance, and it's really sort of tragic when you look at that big picture.
You kind of write how Paul has some verses about that are like anti-logic and anti-reason, and kind of encourages blind faith to a degree. We were plunged into the dark ages where science was rejected because it conflicted with what the Bible said. That's incredibly problematic.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're constructing a hoax and it's a lie and you know it is, you don't want people to think skeptically or critically. You don't want them to think logically because you're giving them a bunch of illogical stuff. So you have to warn them as part of your hoax to say, well, look, don't think too logically and don't dig into this and don't look for evidence because it's not there. Just believe it. I mean, that's got to be part of your story, and that's exactly what he gives us. It's perfect. It's exactly what he has to say because he knows anything otherwise would sink his own ship. So he has to take this anti-rationalist, anti-empiricist approach. And it's there in black and white. So. Yep. Well,
it's like a obedient slave sheep-like mentality almost.
Yeah.
Laziness.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is laziness.
Yeah, intellectual laziness for sure. Absolutely.
Okay, well, I look forward to everybody in the comments. I'm sure it's going to be very spicy. You have no idea how controversial it is to question this sacred cow, or maybe you do, but it's for me, it's definitely very controversial. This going after this dogma and sacred cows, sacrilegious, blasphemy. Like people like us used to get burned at the stake for questioning this kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's like horrendous. I mean, I used to cite the stat that the Europeans, over a period of about 300 years, they burned like 500,000 people. And, I say, well, who was doing these burnings? Well, it was Christian men. That's who were doing it. They picked somebody out and said, you're a devil, you're an evil, you're the witch, and we're going to burn you. I mean, it's just mind-boggling, this mass slaughter by the Christians. Unbelievable. Yeah, that's what happens when you let irrationality rule your life. You do those kind of things.
Yeah. Believe absurdities, you can commit atrocities. David, I appreciate you coming on and talking about this and writing this book and being a philosopher, a true philosopher king. Your websites and your book links will all be in the description below. I appreciate you coming on and chatting with me. Any final parting words for the audience before we wrap it up here?
Nothing special. Just have an open mind. Get the books, read through them, please. This is what I've talked to my critics many times, because they'll jump in, they'll pick a particular point or two that they don't like, or they'll throw out some counter theory. I say, look, just take a look at the book. It's a small little book. It's not expensive. Read the whole thing. Give me a chance to make the argument. And then if you have criticisms or comments, then do it. But, at least take the time to sort of be familiar with the whole argument. And then you're in a position to speak knowledgeably, because too many people just shoot from the hip and they don't really know what they're talking about.
Let me just share this real quick. This is some of the books that I've read before I found yours. Forgotten Origins, the Lost Jewish History of Early Christianity. The Origins of Christianity, Who was the Christ Conspiracy, Not the Impossible Faith, Historicity of Jesus, Nailed 10 Christian Myths that Show Jesus Never Existed. I'm sure you've read this one. You quoted from it, right? Jesus Puzzle, Earl Doherty.
Doherty, yeah.
So we've done the research. I'm ready to debate these issues. I'm trying to get to the bottom of this truth. We see what Christianity today is doing, where their agenda is heading, and you guys know we're just trying to get to the bottom of it. All right, David, I appreciate coming on. Everybody, thanks for watching. I will see you guys again with another video very soon. And nomorenews.org should be up again very soon as well. So everybody, keep an eye out for that. Take care. See you guys later.